Happy fall. We're really excited to be with you today. We have a dynamic speaker, advocate, scholar with us, Mr. Emmanuel Blanchard Jr. And today we are going to dissect the anti racism uh, theory in education as it relates to kids in public schools in New York City. So, this is for all our educators, parents out there, or those that just really care about education. We want you to tune into this and stay into the end because we're going to talk about some really controversial topics today. We definitely want you to engage in the conversation. So, please comment below, share, and like this message, and help us to amplify and elevate these issues that are really important to our community. So we definitely want to hear from you. We'll shout you out as we can throughout this fireside chat. Don't forget to also subscribe to our channel at iRace Inc. And follow us on all social media platforms as well. Don't forget to follow me at Shanika E. Moore on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Mr. Blanchard, it is an honor to have you today.
Thank you so much for having me, Shaniko. I really appreciate it. It's such an honor to be on this platform with you. Thank you so much again.
Yes, we have so much to talk about in such little time, and I'm like inching at the end of my chair, ready to just jump and get started. But I want to formally introduce you and
Thank you.
all the things that you've been doing in the New York City community. As senior pastor, first of the Francis Lewis Boulevard Church of God, you took on that position in September, served as a youth pastor for over a decade, and were competing, which news to me, competed in the McDonald's Gospel Fest to community development projects. You're also in the education field and industry, architecting that and deconstructing and reconstructing new systems. You've analyzed latent, passive, intentional structures within education spaces that simultaneously, empower some while imprisoning. That is incredible, while imprisoning others. Um, You've also developed educational strategies that foster empowerment, diversity, creativity, accountability, and empathy. I love that empathy. I'm actually going to be doing a series on empathy, so this is great. You've attended the prestigious Queens College Center for Preparatory Studies and Music, and also, if I heard correctly, is a graduate of Teachers College. Right.
Columbia University and LIU and some other schools, but
Shout out to Columbia, both alumni of Columbia University.
to you.
Um, that's great. And now reside in New York City. In your free time, you continue writing, producing music for various artists, and also a proud uncle of six amazing human beings. That's incredible. So again, welcome, Emmanuel. I'm so grateful to have you today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm so excited, and I know it's time to just get into it. So let's do it.
Yeah, so we're talking about anti-racism in education today.
Right.
But just taking a step back, what inspired you to get into this field? Who was it that sort of opened the door for you, or what was it that happened that really transpired you to jump into the field of education?
Wow, that's a really great question. I went to Columbia undergrad, and when I went there, the thing that everyone did is they went into some field that they were going to accrue lots of money, prestige, power. But I'm the child of West Indian immigrants, and the secret always is, and my father would say this every time he would drop me off to school, is education is the key, education is the key, education is the key. And you hear that over and over again, and you start to understand that there's something about unlocking the power of the brain. So whereas I initially thought I was going to go to law school, I had friends of mine who just transformed my way of thinking. And so people like Evangelist Vandalyn Kennedy, who's a great friend of mine, Reverend Clinton Miller of Brown Memorial Baptist Church, and so many other powerful educators, Dr. James R. Green, who was my high school band teacher. These are individuals who came in and they showed the complexity of being an educator, that you can be someone who stands in a space and you can affect massive systemic change just like that. So I truly credit them. And there are definitely more individuals who were important, but my parents, those particular educators, they were fundamental in crafting my field in terms of education.
Incredible. And so just to hear the knowledge, and the wisdom, and all the things that were instilled in you, passed on by great people whose shoulders you now stand on,
Absolutely.
it's incredible to hear that. I'm also thinking about, um, as an educator, and much more than an educator, you are Mr. Blanchard, but as an educator, you are, we're in such a pivotal time right now in our era,
Mhm.
where many structures have changed, systems are being deconstructed, and new ones are now arising. The generation as we known it has now completely changed. We're now educating the alpha generation. Gen
Mhm.
Z is now growing up. They're now pushed into the workforce. What does it mean to be an educator in today's world?
It means that you are engaging, and I think this is something that a lot of educators don't realize, is in so much as you enter into the field of education, you are in actuality engaging in all of the systems of a city, a state, a country, the global economy. When you engage as an educator, the first time you step into a classroom, you are in effect a politician. You are in effect an anthropologist. You are engaging in the crafting of a nation's citizenry. And so I think one of the things that you sign up for when you become an educator is that you start to see that you have your hands in every industry. You are involved in local economics. You're involved in local politics. You're involved in a local economy. So, for example, how many businesses in whatever town you're in, including the town that I'm in right now, where you will be like businesses rely on the local school, they rely on the local community. And
Mm.
so I think one of the things that, eventually educators have to come and embrace about themselves is that you're not just an educator, because an educator has always been multidimensional. And in so much as society is changing, I think educators just have to accept that identity. You are multifaceted because you have chosen to be an educator.
I mean, I love that answer. It really does mirror, to me, social workers being multidimensional. And I
Mhm.
think we've seen this new wave of social workers and educators really partnering together and, spearheading a lot of these issues that our kids are dealing with. So I love that the new educator is multidimensional, multifaceted.
Mhm.
So we're talking about anti-racism in education. And I know this is such a huge concept to really dissect. But if you can tell us in your own words, what does anti-racist education look like?
Anti-racism education looks like this, and I'm just going to let everyone know this is a real educator here. You're going to hear a school bell in about a minute. So,
Love it.
and then
Live.
another one in 5 minutes, live in the school building. Um, what anti-racism education is, and I think that most people can start to construct the beginnings of the definition, is that it's really about what is it that we're teaching students about themselves in classrooms. That's the base of it. So allowing voices that often have been forced to the margins, to allow them to begin to present themselves in various classrooms. But I think that one of the things that people miss is that that's just the beginning of it. To some extent, it's just about what's being taught in the classroom, but it's way bigger than that. It's also about who are the voices that are shaping the classroom.
Hmm.
And I think that's the piece that's often missing in terms of people's discussions with regards to what anti-racism education is. Because education is not just about what's being taught, it's also about who's deciding what's being taught. So, for
Wow.
example, real anti-racist education is allowing for not just children to learn about the system, but to allow parents to really begin to understand who's making these decisions. For example, who comprises a board of education?
Yeah.
Boards of education wield a lot of power in terms of shaping, developing, and choosing curriculum.
Hmm.
Another part of true full fledged
Hmm.
anti-race education is understanding what constitutes teacher training programs.
Yeah.
Teachers go to school to become teachers, but what's the curriculum? What's being taught
Yeah.
to teachers? Who's deciding what curriculum is apropos or appropriate for
Hmm.
teachers? Another thing that very few people think about is how are administrators in your various buildings selected? Who's choosing the
Hmm.
face of a building? Who's choosing the principals? Who's choosing the vice principals? What are the qualifications that are being heralded or being highlighted in terms of who's leading this? How are teachers being selected?
Mhm.
So I think on the one level, when we look at anti-racist education, I think a lot of people get really hamstrung in terms of just looking at the content that's being taught. But how I view it is looking at how the entire system of education operates and functions.
That is, I love that answer. It really puts me in the mind of the power holders. So
Yes,
where does the power, where is power in the Board of Education and Department of Education, and how is it structured? What are
hmm
the power lines? Who's making these decisions? Who are the decision makers? Are parents at the table when decisions are being made? Or are they consistently sort of ignored and pushed to the side and not
absolutely,
invited in these spaces? And who are the ones making decisions about our kids, about the curriculum that's
absolutely,
to be taught, about the actual curriculum that teachers are learning to become teachers? So I think
absolutely.
this is so, I know there's so complex and so layered, and there are so many ways we can go with it. Um, but I do want to read this quote that I had for you,
Sure.
Emmanuel, which kind of goes in step with what you were talking about. And it's an article that I pulled this from, actually, just to cite the article. It's How State Standards Misteach the Meaning of One of the United States' Most Important Eras. So it's talking about the Reconstruction era.
Yeah.
Um, and what was stated in this quote is that for many educators, teaching through an anti-racism lens means helping students understand racism's origin and guises, past and present, so they can act to disrupt white supremacy rather than perpetrate it. And so I was wondering if you can speak to what that means to you. What does
Mm.
it mean for educators to really adopt an anti-racism lens and help their students understand racism? So it's not just the understanding of it, but it's also the action to teach them how to disrupt it rather than perpetrate it.
It's a brilliant way of approaching and speaking to this. I mean, I'll take it back to when I was in school, learning how to be a teacher, learning how to teach, learning how to be an educator. The height that what was considered to be a master teacher was not someone who just got kids to regurgitate information.
Yeah.
It was for kids to be able to, or students rather, because it's not just kids we're talking about here. The height of being a master teacher was this idea of getting kids or students rather to be able to understand something and to then do something with that thing.
Yeah.
When I was first learning to be an educator, it was about application mastery, understanding application.
Yes.
Unfortunately, what the current political conversation, the
Mhm.
politicization of education has done is that it's eroded what's always been at the heart of education:
Yeah.
mastery, understanding, application.
Hmm.
And that's also true when it comes to difficult subject matter. Now, I can go off on the tangent with this one, but um, even in education, dealing with the difficult has always been at the heart of education, true education.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
when you're learning about something, the easy mastery of the easy isn't a reflection of true education. It isn't a true reflection of a true pursuit of knowledge.
Hmm.
It's when we dig into the difficult, whether it's like you're playing a musical piece and there's a part that you fumble over. What I learned was that you have to go and dig into the area that is difficult.
Yeah.
Whether it's a place where you start to experience cognitive dissonance.
Mhm.
Um, Narcissism is really just repeating the same thing over and over again and just wanting that to be true and accurate.
Yeah.
True knowledge is a pursuit of that which is difficult and to understand, man, this is changing me.
Yeah.
This is something with which I have to wrestle.
Hmm.
And so that's what I try to do in my classrooms. It's
Yeah.
it's really a presentation where I want my students of any age to really understand that there are some difficult things that you have to understand, and at sometimes that I'm only the beginning of your understanding, and
Yeah.
you will encounter this in various ways, shapes, and forms. And I think that that truly speaks to the heart of education, this idea of embracing the difficult, including difficult history,
Mhm.
because it's truly in the difficult that you become better.
Yeah. I'm just literally taking it all in. It's so much. And
Right.
you talk about the heart of education, and I don't know if I've ever heard that before. Um, we almost ask the question, what are we doing? You
Yeah.
know, if the heart of education um is to jump and to dissect the difficult and to understand from it, then why are we running from it, or why are we not
Yeah.
addressing it?
That's the question.
Because you said it's not the mastery of the easy, it's the mastery of the difficult
Yeah.
is the essence or the heart of education. But I find a lot, and I'm not an educator per se,
Hmm.
but that in spaces, a lot of difficult history is often hidden. Um, we talk about the critical race theory, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that again.
Hmm.
That being one of them, why in many states there have been a lot of efforts to completely disband it or to completely dismantle it. But I think that there are parts of that race and racism that it's the difficult that you talked about. It's imperfect, it's messy, it's
Yes,
scary.
it is.
It also maybe even puts you in a place of vulnerability. There are questions now that may arise from children that they need to know the answer to. I could remember a time when I took my daughter to the museum and the Black Museum in DC, and I apologize if I'm not saying the correct name, but it's a
No,
museum
no.
where it really takes you through the history of slavery with so much. It's overwhelming when you go through the museum because there's so much history there that's hidden in text, that's not necessarily included in textbooks, that's excluded in our history classes and lessons. And my daughter was completely confused at the age of 5 years old,
Hmm.
never hearing about slavery, going to a predominantly white school, but never hearing about slavery, and was asking questions like, what is this? What is a slave? And why did they enslave them? And why were kids in slavery? And so it's the messy part. It's not the easy. It's the difficult conversations that
It
you
is.
are now addressed with, and that you have to now find a way to deal with. And so there's this is really, really it's this difficult even talking about without the time to really go deep into it, but love to
Yeah.
hear your feedback and your response.
Education requires, I mean, one of the things I learned in college is that education, true academia, and I think that's part of it too, is that, one of the great crises we face in education, particularly K through 12 education, is that we don't know what we want it to be.
Yeah.
It's do we want it to be babysitting or glorified babysitting? Do we want our schools to be a center of education? Do we want to challenge our students? Do we simply want our schools to just simply be a feeder system to colleges and universities, but without rigor? Many times, like, one of the things that we see in schools, and if you ask many educators, administrators, boards of eds, is that they're kowtowing and they're appeasing so many different interest groups. It's unclear what the focal point of education is. And I
Yeah.
think that's at the heart of it. But when I went to college, like, it was clear that this is about academia. This is about learning and
Yeah.
thinking, and really not just thinking about the world around you, but using the world around you as a way to measure and to think about yourself.
Yeah.
Introspection. You can't, you know, it,
Oh yeah.
one of one of the great things that I learned, it was that we begin to learn more about the world around us when we begin to embrace vulnerability and introspection.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that that's something with regards to education, and really speaking to very difficult issues. It's hard for us if we have a society that often does not want to engage in a dissection of the vulnerabilities that we have as a collective society. And that does include things like the history of slavery, that does include things like Japanese internment, that does include the treatment of Native Americans. And making it disappear does not, eventually someone will uncover the bones. At some point, you can hide it as much as possible, but at some point someone will uncover the bones. And the other piece of it that's also disheartening is remembering that we have an obligation to be honest.
Yes.
We have an obligation to be honest.
Yeah.
um, Very quickly, the other way I talk about this is that I also serve as a pastor. As a pastor, I have a moral obligation
Yeah.
as a history instructor to teach the history of oppressed peoples.
Yeah.
It's even biblical. I mean, in the Bible, there's a whole long history, and then you have a group of people who become oppressed, and one of their responsibilities is to remember their history.
That's right.
So it's actually a moral failing
Wow.
when we decide not to share the history of oppressed peoples, because there are
Mm.
Judeo-Christian examples of where there was a moral responsibility to maintain and to preserve the history of oppressed groups.
Wow. That, I love the way you combine those two things. And it reminds me of a comment you made before we went live. And that is, I'm trying to find my notes here, but you said education has a lot of dirty little secrets.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh
Reminds me
yeah.
of that comment, wondering if you can expound on that.
Listen, a lot of us, I will never pretend to be an expert in how cars are made, though I've been driving for over 20 years. But what often happens in terms of discussing public education is most of us don't actually know how public education is made, how deals are made, how curriculum is decided. And most of our information comes from sources that don't ever delve into those backroom deals,
Mm.
textbooks and, all of those things.
Mhm.
And so what often happens is that we have, and particularly today, we have politicians who are really great at inciting and infusing and really engaging our emotions, but they're never truly talking about what's happening in classrooms. They're never truly talking about
Yeah.
what's happening in school buildings. They're never really talking about like how much funding is actually going to schools.
Yeah.
We never really talk about the differences between schools. We never talk about like boards of eds. There's so many components and mechanisms that go into education that aren't funny, they aren't sexy, they aren't entertaining, but they're
Mhm.
critical to really understanding how public schools work. And if people actually knew the secrets of how decisions are made, then they would be better served in terms of making greater decisions and being participants in the shaping of public school policies.
Public school policy, we talked about power holders and decision makers making decisions without essential groups of people being in the room, such as
Mhm.
parents. I think that's so profound. For many, many years, parents have felt isolated from decisions being made about their kids as it pertains to education and curricula. What are some ways that we can reimagine that and reshape policy by ensuring that the right people are at the table?
That's a great question. And what's funny is that depending on the kind of school we're talking about, there are some schools where parents are very involved. There are some schools where parents are dictating what takes place. There are some schools where, if you look at the hierarchy of power, if you look at the organizational flow chart of power, there are some parents who really know how to work the system. The issue is that often those parents are often shaping policy for their families and their families alone.
Wow.
And so we need is a more equitable system where it's not about what's in the best interest for me and my family.
Yeah.
It's in what's in the best interest of all families. And so what we need really are parents who are underserved and from or part of oppressed groups. They need better access to running for school board. They need better access to becoming heads of PTAs. They need better access to be able to know what's happening. And oftentimes, and unfortunately, this is one of the dirty secrets of education. I can't believe I'm spilling this, but I will. Is that schools will often appease those who are the largest and the most vocal and the most antagonizing. And
Wow.
so the resources have to be allocated toward those
Mm.
groups because they're just going to raise a stink. They're just going to raise a stink. They're just going to raise a stink. Imagine if we can reimagine it so that schools are equitable by nature and not just appeasing those who are the most cantankerous, those who are the most antagonistic, those who are the most vocal dissidents. And
Mm.
so this is the real great disservice that we do is that often schools, because of the limited amount of resources we have, we're often just appeasing a small segment of the population. And we're doing a Houdini trick to kind of, do smoke and mirrors to pretend as if we have the resources, we have the time, we have the monies, we have the talent, we have the staff to cater to every single student when there's a small percentage that often siphons off those resources and that time and that energy.
Wow. How are these funding decisions made? If you have any insight or would like to share how, just for educational purposes, those that are watching, how are these funding decisions made?
It depends where you are. I mean, each school district, and that's one of the great mysteries of education in the United States, is that school districts are different. You know, one school district right next to one another, you could have different policies emerging. You can have different decisions. You can have different powers. And so, especially in New York, the suburbs of New York City,
Oh
you
yeah.
have very, very different policies that emerge, and
Mm.
schools can be 5, 6, 7 miles apart from one another. And so this is really the great frustration, is that there isn't uniformity. Not that I'm suggesting that there's uniformity across the board for every particular decision,
Right.
but it's often about who really sits at the seat of power. And so that's often not that it's not often the people who are on the ground. It could be a few select individuals who are making some of these decisions. They're deciding what programs are going to get instituted. And oftentimes you have to wonder, why are certain programs being promoted? Why are certain programs being pushed? Is it because it's for the betterment of all students, or is it for the betterment of a small portion of students? And that's the component that's often missed. And this is even an art itself. When we discuss education, there's even a piece of this that's called the politics of education.
Oh yeah. Mhm.
And that's even a layered, nuanced, animal unto itself, where there are people who are really good at saying, okay, we need this program. I only need it for 30 people, but
Hmm.
it's going to be at the expense of 300 people.
Wow.
And that's a part of it that's not necessarily, people are very skilled at understanding and digging through, but it's at your cost, it's at taxpayer dollars, it's at the expense of teacher time, it's at the expense of faculty time, staff time. So there's a whole level in terms of how it operates from district to district, because there are macro politics and then there's micro politics. It is a fascinating study.
This is fascinating indeed. And now I am really intrigued to learn more. I'm going to do some research a little more
Absolutely.
after this, but there sounds like there needs to be transparency in how funding
Absolutely.
decisions are made, especially as it relates to our kids' education and to how these funds are being utilized and why certain programs are being pushed in our schools and why certain ones are not. Um, I know that there is a city budget that everyone can see. It's visible.
Mhm.
Every school has a budget, but I think even in that, just understanding how these funds are being dispersed is important to parents and even to educators. Like I do
Absolutely.
believe educators need to have a clear understanding of how these power lines work, especially in a system that they're working in.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's so important that transparency is one of the things I once told one of my supervisors is that the lack of transparency only works for those who are in power.
Mm,
It never works for those who aren't in power. It only works for those who are empowered.
wow. That right there, I'm going to marinate on that. Lack of transparency only works for those that are in power. And you are all into the Power series that I'll be actually launching in another month. This is really good, and we're almost ending for time, but I would love to know and pick your brain. What does it look like to re-architect education in New York City schools in the next 5 to 10 years? What would that look like?
There's a lot of work that's happening. It's a lot of work that, I just introduced the terms macro and micro politics.
Yeah.
I encourage all of my fellow educators to embrace who you are as an educator. There's so many different things that you can do. And there's so many different things that I try to do on a micro level, on a macro level. This is an example of a macro level conversation, one that has an intersection between New York City and what's happening in Atlanta. And whomever is watching this, you can be an advocate. And it's one of the things that I try to do. So the work that I try to do is, I've always been, throughout my tenure as a teacher, as an educator, I've always been an other. I recognize that. I've embraced that. The joke that I always say is that I'm Jackie Robinson, and I know plenty of other Jackie Robinsons, people like me, men of color, who you occupy a specific space in education. And it either makes people uncomfortable, which at times it has where I've stood, but it also serves as an opportunity where I've had to, because it's my moral responsibility, it's my ethical responsibility to stand for those like me who's been, underserved by education systems. It looks like advocacy. It looks like creating and writing curriculum
Yeah.
Educators, listen, one of the things that's most empowering is writing curriculum. At this point in my career, I've created curriculum for over 20 classes. Um,
Incredible.
and you need voices who have unique experiences writing curriculum, crafting curriculum, because you understand it, as opposed to having districts purchasing canned products that were made thousands of miles away, and they don't understand who you are as an
Mm.
educator. They don't understand your classes. They don't understand the community in which you work. Develop your own curriculum. And I
Yeah.
think that there's so many different things we can do that would empower us and create a more genuine education system that the possibilities are limitless at this point.
I love that. And I love that you end it with the possibilities because I do believe that there's a lot of potential to
Absolutely.
move education forward, to move the needle forward. I believe that education system is completely changing, and in the next 5 to 10 years, a lot of things will be obsolete. I believe that a lot of our methodologies are very archaic and are based on a world that no longer exists, and so we have to reimagine and restructure these new. Um, we have to re-architect curricula, like you said, needs to be done or created by those that understand, that have unique experiences, co-designing
Yeah.
with the communities that we're working with. And so there's so much limitless possibilities, and I believe that despite all of the challenges that we're up against, that there is hope for our education system, and with great people like you, Emmanuel, who are spearheading and leading the charge. I have a lot of hope for what things will look like for the future.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for saying that, and thank you so much for allowing me to have time on this platform, this great platform. And just want to encourage every single educator, particularly educators of color who are standing in the field. And you're one of many, but the work that you do is immensely valuable. And we can definitely partner and do this work together, from together and afar. So I'm excited about the possibilities.
I love that, Emmanuel. How can people reach you if they just want to learn more about you or interested in connecting with you? How could they reach out to you?
Oh, thank you so much. It's EJ_Blanchard, which is Blanchard on all social media. So that's Instagram, that's Facebook, that's Twitter. I do a lot of conversations with regards to really like dismantling some of the political speak online. So, for example, some of the things I've been talking about recently it has included how people have misconstrued what CRT is. That's something that's taught on the graduate school level. There's nothing wrong with CRT, but people have politicized it so much so that
Mm.
people are up in an uproar, and they don't understand that you're being hoodwinked. A sixth grade teacher is not teaching CRT. They're
Right,
basically teaching kids how to hold a pencil, how to hold a pen,
right.
and that conversation is distracting from other ways in which we can empower underserved communities and underrepresented communities. So
Wow.
you can find me on all socials, EJ_Blanchard, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn as well. And I would love to connect with you and continue this conversation.
I love that. And so please go to his social media and just follow him, listen to the conversations. He's rebuilding. Or I do believe that you're one of the forerunners in our time that's rebuilding education as
Thank you
we
so
know it.
much.
So I do really admonish you to please go out and follow him. I was so leaning to say, where's the book and how could people copy of it, but I don't know if I'm going ahead of myself.
No, there will be coming one at some point. And that's right. Like it has to happen, and there you need unique voices offering new strategies and new ways of seeing this. And yes, I consider myself one of the people who will be leading that charge very soon. So yes, it's
Super.
it's going to come. I'll tell you offline when it happens.
Yes, and then curriculum. If teachers just need help in how to develop curriculum, are you offering any coaching services to teachers, or can they connect with you about that as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. One of my passions is really writing curriculum, developing curriculum, and also mentoring teachers. One of the things I love doing, even where I work as a teacher, as an educator, I am constantly partnering with other teachers, being a soundboard, like, hey, what's a creative way of doing this? What's a unique way of including a different voice with this? This is something I love doing. So if you want to include different voices, just reach out to me and we can partner together. And I'll show you ways in which you can include, for example, a story. If we're talking about the scientific method and questions about the scientific method, how you can include the Tuskegee experiments and also
Wow.
medical representation. There are ways of building links where it doesn't seem like it's natural, but it's possible.
This is incredible. Where were you last year when we did a series on medical racism? We talked about it from the educational stance. We got to invite you back on. This is incredible, guys.
Absolutely.
He's a scholar. He's
Absolutely.
an expert at this. We can go on and on. We got to bring you back because this conversation must continue. But
Thank
I
you.
am so honored to have you again, Emmanuel, on our platform. We appreciate you and all that you do, especially as a man of color standing and leading the charge. I know there's not a lot of numbers, not a lot of people that look like you in this field. And so we understand. I'm not an educator, but look, I am a social worker and we have to be multifaceted. We have to be
Absolutely.
multidimensional. And so we share
Absolutely.
that and comment. And so the kids that you teach and the systems that you are attached to, they are truly blessed to have you. So thank you again for being with us.
Thank you so much, Nico. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much. And much success to you and
Thank
continued success for all the work that you're doing as well, all across the country.
thank you. Well, I received that. Thank you so much. And thank you all so much for tuning in to this empowering message. We do want you to amplify it and help us to really get the message and the word out by sharing this message and liking it if you're watching it later on. We still love to hear your comments. Comment below. We'll be checking it later on to respond to those that have commented. And we do appreciate you. We appreciate you for following our content. Next week, we're going to be talking about education and digging deeper into this topic. So please stay tuned and don't forget to subscribe to our ATL Rise podcast, which is currently being rebranded. You can listen to the last episode on education, actually, and anti-racism that was released 2 weeks ago. Stay tuned. We love you all and we appreciate you. We see you again next week. Thank you.